Hi everyone. Today I want to come back to the ZT0308 I got about a week ago. So I put up a first impressions video just talking about my initial kind of thoughts. But now that I've carried it for about a week and I've absolutely still love it and I still think you should get it. Just a bit of a background. I don't carry big knives. I have small to medium sized hands. So a lot of the knives that I carry are, 3 inch, maybe 3 and a quarter inch knife. And I also, I work in the office and, I don't really have a lot of real estate in my pocket to be carrying, big chunky knives like the 0308. But the reason why I got it is because it really reminded me of when I first started this knife journey about 10, 11 years ago, and ZT was really known for these kinds of knives. They didn't really have small, sleek, slim knives. A lot of all their knives were really big, bulky, and tank like. So when I saw ZT come out with the 0308, it just really drew me back and reminded me of where they came from, and they did a fantastic job with this knife. And I want to kind of go through my experience with it so far and give a little bit more insight. First of all, this knife, it kind of has this Shallow Hal syndrome. And what I mean by that is that, the movie Shallow Hal is about a guy that's really, shallow, and he just goes after, he really likes girls that are, skinny and beautiful, but they're very, they're shallow as well, and they don't really have a great personality. But this guy puts a spell on him, so he's able to see kind of how the girl is like on the inside, right? So if the girl has a really bad personality or just really messed up, then he'll see them as like ugly and whatnot. So he ends up falling in love with this girl that has a very beautiful personality, just a really great person, but she's obese. But he sees her as this very slim, very beautiful girl. And the reason why I say that is because this knife is big, it's bulky, but it carries and it uses like a smaller knife. And I'll tell you the reasons why. But first of all, I do want to say that this is a big knife and it is a heavy knife. I believe it weighs in something like 6.9 or 7 inches. So you're definitely going to feel it in your hand and you're going to feel it in your pocket. I've carried this around in my jean pocket, and it feels actually really great when it's clipped to your pocket. But if it's just like riding loose in your pocket, you're definitely going to feel it. But going back to the reason why I feel like this carries and uses like a smaller knife is because of several factors. First of all, it's a very slim knife for its size. I want to bring a knife in that I think a lot of people have. This is the 0562 titanium, and if you compare it, it is relatively maybe the 0308 is slightly thicker, but not by much. And if you know anything about the 0562, it's a pretty slim knife. I love this knife. This is a fantastic knife. Anyways, another knife I want to bring into the picture is the Paramilitary 2. I think most people have this knife in their collection or have used it. So it is a pretty slim riding knife. There's a blocky handle. So it does compare pretty well with the 0308. The 0308 does have a little bit more of a contour on both sides, but overall this is a very slim knife. It rides really well. It rides really flat against your body when you have it clipped to your pocket, and it doesn't take a lot of real estate when it's in your pocket in terms of the thickness wise. And so it's a fantastic knife. It does feel pretty slim in the hand too, and it's an amazing knife. The great thing about this pocket clip, I really like it, is because the tension is perfect. So it's not so stiff where it's gonna kill your pocket or your finger, but it's also stiff enough where it'll retain in your pocket and not just accidentally just slip out. Another great thing is this titanium. It does have milling around it, so it does have some nice traction, but it's not so aggressive where it's gonna, you know, cause your pocket to tear up or your finger to tear up. So it is fairly smooth. So it's really easy to kind of slide it in out of your pocket. I really like that. Like I said, it is very carryable with jeans. It does ride up modestly high at about, maybe I want to say a 3.25 inches, so it rides up that high, so you will be able to see it. It is a little bit obvious when you're carrying this clip to your pocket. Another amazing thing I love about this knife is the action and the sound. So in my first impressions video, I said that I expected the sound to be like a big, chunky, heavy sound because of how big and how hefty this knife is. But the sound is more like crisp and metallic. And I don't know if it's like this hole that they've engineered into the handle. Maybe that affects it acoustically. I don't know, but it sounds so nice. It just sounds so like refined. I don't know if the sound is coming through the video, but oh, that sound is so addicting. I love it. Another thing about this knife is that that I love about it is the blade. It is a tall blade, but they did it this flat grinds really well. So it goes all the way, almost all the way up to the spine of the blade, and it comes down to like a really nice thin edge. So it slices really well for how big this knife is. I've cut like heavy, like grain cardboard with this knife, and it cuts really well. I mean, it cuts way above, you know, the knife that it looks like. You know, you think that's not like a really good cutter, but it is an excellent cutter. I really recommend it. Another great thing about this knife is I did take this knife apart, and it was super easy to take apart. I was able to find, I believe this takes like a 1/2-inch wrench, but I was able to find the, like the wrench that you could adjust, where you could like adjust the head. And so I was able to just put it in, put it right on the pivot, and it came off super easy. And, I cleaned it up, and it put back together super easy. So this is a very easy knife to service in the field. So yeah, they did a great job with that. When I did take this apart, I mean, you could see like the quality craftsmanship, like, that all ZT knives have, so it's a pleasure to take apart and clean and just really appreciate the internals working of this knife. With that being said, this knife is truly overbuilt for sure. Pretty much all the possible points of failure, like the pivot, the lock bar interface area, has been just reinforced with a lot of mass and with a lot of extra hardware. So this pivot, it is the beefiest, biggest pivot I've ever seen. If you see right there, that is like the bottom of the pivot screw. And so when you take it apart, you get to really appreciate how large that pivot screw is. Another thing is that lock bar insert, you get to see it is reinforced with 2 screws instead of 1. I think that's pretty awesome. I mean, if you lose a screw, you still have another screw that kind of keep it in place. But I mean, every possible points of failure has really been just reinforced to make sure that it is not going to break on you, unless you do something so ridiculous that, I mean, it really warrants that. But other than that, it is such a solid tank of a knife. I also really like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that stop pin also is just a really large stop pin. I don't know if you can see it. Let me see. It's kind of hard to show it because it is a black stop pin, so it's kind of hard to see. But another great thing about this the way they designed it is that if you see the back of the blade, there is like that space where that stop pin will kind of be secured into that space. So it kind of buries, very deeply into the back of the blade. So it just really provides that sense of just like that security of like, man, this blade ain't going nowhere. Like I mentioned, when I did take this knife apart, something I really appreciated about the design is that this side is actually, they machined like a space in the G10. So this pivot screw doesn't move. So you could just take the wrench and unscrew this part, and this part will stay stationary, which is great. You don't need like two tools to kind of, you know, hold it together. You just, all you need is to unscrew this side and it's going to come apart super easy. And I really love when companies do that, where they kind of keep one, you know, Spyderco, they do it with some of their knives where they'll have the screw like a D shaped, so it doesn't, you know, screw together, you know, it doesn't move together with the other side. And so they did a really great job with this knife. The flipper tab is really well integrated. It's really well designed. So when it's in the closed position, it, you know, it doesn't protrude out so much where it's going to be a nuisance. You know, it's very small for how big this knife is. And then when you open it, it kind of integrates really well. Streamlines really well into the handle shape. So you kind of could see, it kind of follows that line. I really love how they did that. So they did a fantastic job on the flipper tab. Another thing I noticed is that the internals on the G10 side are milled out. So I don't know if this will, if you could see that through the camera, but this side is milled out, but the titanium slab is completely, it's not milled out. So that's why I think a lot of heft is going to come from that side, as well as this hefty blade. But other than that, it's, yeah, they did a really good job with the milling on the inside. All around, honestly, the milling on the handles on both sides are really fantastic. Just the machining on this knife is amazing. One thing I did notice, and I don't think it's an issue at all, but you know, when they machined out that the radius of the back of the blade to interface with the lock bar, you know, they kind of machined it into part of the jimping. Honestly, no big deal for me, but you know, just to you know, point that out. Like I said, fantastic action. Lockup is solid like always. I did notice that the detent has loosened up just a little bit. When I first got this knife, it was incredibly stiff, but after playing with it for about a week, it has loosened up to where it is still, I guess, it is stiffer than, like, I would say like the 0562 for sure, but it's loosened it up a little bit, so it's a lot nicer. And all I did was I just played with it, I took it apart, I cleaned it, and I think over time it'll continue to kind of loosen up a little bit, but the detent is, yeah, I really like where it's at right now. It gives just enough resistance to just provide a satisfying action. So that's that. Another thing I really love about this knife is that there's no jimping where your finger lands after you flip that tab. So some knife companies, they add like this really aggressive jimping right here where your finger lands, and it's kind of, over time it kind of messes with your finger. But this one, the landing zone is completely smooth, so it just provides a really just pleasant landing zone. I really like that. Yeah, the jimping on the spine of the blade is also very nice. It's not overly aggressive. It's just enough to provide like a tactile sensation that you know where your thumb is, and yeah, it feels really nice. I like that. Like I mentioned, there's milling on both sides of the handle, and it is contoured very slightly, so it does, you know, even though it is a slim profile, it does fill the hand really well. I love it. Another great thing about this knife is that they did mill out the area where you engage and disengage the lock bar. So there is really good real estate to kind of get your thumb in there, and then just to kind of engage and disengage the lock bar. I really like that. They've really thought through everything. You know, they've been doing this for a long time, so I definitely could see how they've really refined this knife, how they thought through all the kind of practical aspects of their design and how it's gonna interface with the end user. And so, fantastic job. Now, I wanna, let me see if I missed anything. Yeah, so just some recommendations. And this is not a knock on this knife because I know why they designed this knife. It's supposed to be big, it's supposed to be large, to be overbuilt, and so I love that. So I think this is not really a recommendation to make this knife better per se, but maybe just some food for thought, right? So maybe making this knife a little bit lighter by, I don't know, milling out some other parts, maybe like milling out the titanium side of the handle a little bit. It could probably make the knife a little bit lighter for sure. Another thing is I would love to see this knife like in a smaller variation. So like I said, this is a 3 3/4 of an inch knife, maybe coming out with like a 3 1/4 inch knife and a smaller handle. Oh man, I'd be all over that. But I love this knife too, for sure. In terms of the stiff detent, I don't know if this is just, something, for sure, I know it's going to wear out over time. So I don't know if necessarily I want less, like a looser detent out of the box, because I know eventually it will loosen up anyway. But for sure, I did feel how stiff that detent was. And, my baseline really is I'm comparing that to the 0562. And the 0562 has a pretty nice detent. It's pretty, it's definitely softer. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is that, so with the 0562, when you disengage the lock, right, you could essentially overcome that detent ball just by pushing down on the blade, and then it'll come down, right? So you could just overcome that like by doing that. But with the 0562, once you disengage the lock and it bumps up against the detent ball, it is super hard. Like, I don't really want to try because it's gonna slam shut, but I can't really close the knife, like, and this is with the knife being disengaged, if you could see right there. So I disengage, and it's now resting on the detent ball itself. And I noticed this when I took it apart, that the detent ball protrudes, really high up from the slab. So it's definitely, that's I think that's part of the reason why this has such a stiff detent, and probably the lock bar tension. But yeah, I cannot just like take my finger and try to close this shut due to that detent ball. So just another food for thought. Another thing is that because I have small to medium sized hands, I do encounter a slight hot spot right where that hump is. So it kind of like, it goes right about there. If I'm riding more like towards the back, this feels pretty good. But if I want to kind of choke up, I do feel that hot spot a little bit. But it feels really good in this grip, for sure. This is really comfortable. It feels really good in the, I don't know what grip, the overhand grip or whatnot. It feels super good in this position. But if I want to choke up on it, I do feel like a little bit of a hot spot there. And this knife does go for like $300, I believe. I got this from a Kershaw guy for $220, and it looks like a lot of Kershaw knife, a lot of ZT knives are on sale at a lot of the major retailers. So if you could snag this for like, $200 or $220, I think that's like an amazing deal for this knife. $300, I still would definitely get it for sure. For $220, without a doubt. For $200, I saw this knife go for $202 at Chicago Knife Works or something like that. And so, man, if you could get it for that price, shoot, that's an amazing deal for a knife of this quality and this size. And so, with that being said, I really still highly recommend this knife. Like I said, I don't carry big knives, but man, this knife I definitely carry, and I definitely play with and use. And so I really, if you are a small knife guy like me, and you're wondering, oh man, is this knife too big for me? Is it gonna be too chunky or clunky? I'm gonna tell you right now, get it. You will not regret it. It's seriously that good of a knife, and I really recommend it. If you have any questions, you could leave you could leave your questions in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. So far, yes, get this knife. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.